Hi and welcome to another video on the British Sabre, or British military swordsmanship. Today we're going to be looking at striking or attacking towards the leg. We've already covered in the footwork how to defend against it, and it's standard throughout most forms of swordsmanship that if somebody attacks the lead leg, withdraw it to get it out of the way and strike them from high, whether thrust or cut. That's quite normal practice. You normally go for the head, the lead arm, something like that. So that's how you defend against it. And you might then think, okay, well, why would you ever go for the leg if there's such a good defense for it? Now, attacking to the leg when you've got just a single sword, and by that I mean nothing in your offhand, is very dangerous. If you've got a buckler or a dagger or a shield or a cloak, something like that, something that can, sword up, something that can actually engage this, whether it's in guard or extended in front of us with an actual attack, if you've got some kind of weapon here that can close that line of attack off, we can very safely attack towards the leg. When you haven't got that, and these are sabres, so you can't really do open hand parries against much of it, when you haven't got that offhand weapon, you have to find ways to create openings to be able to strike the leg that are safe. And that's quite difficult. It's very, very common to be struck on the head or upper target zones like your arm as well when you go for the leg. And the simple reason is that if Esther now cuts towards my leg, I withdraw and I cut. And pretty much everybody that trains in some sort of a weapon like this, whether it's longsword, sabre, whatever else, or even rapier, they'll automatically do it. Somebody goes for their leg, they'll withdraw and strike. So we have to get them in a position where they are vulnerable to a leg strike. And what that usually means is some kind of engagement of the blade or feint that keeps them in place where they are, or puts them in a position where they're not quickly able to respond to your redirection. And there are a few examples of how we can do it. The first thing you would never really want to do is cut towards the leg if your opponent goes into a typical sort of hanging guards. So if Esther goes into a hanging guard, if they ever go into this sort of position, it's incredibly dangerous to strike to the leg. So that's the one rule, is don't do it against that. Whether she stood in it, or you start your feint and she goes up to a hanging guard. Don't do it. Go down into outside guard. If you can bait your opponent into this, so a classic example would be to just use cut 6, sort of nice sort of medium height sort of cut, horizontal cut, to get her into an outside guard. Then we can much more successfully strike towards the leg without so much risk of this big hanging parry cut coming afterwards. So that's one example, outside guard. And I would generally say that forcing somebody into the outside guard like that is one of the safest ways to cut towards the leg. And the reason is, we've already looked at the hanging guard. If Esther goes into inside guard, the problem with inside guard is it allows and encourages a really fast snap-in cut 2 or even cut 6 to follow it. So if you get somebody into this position through some kind of feint and then we cut towards the leg, is a very, very powerful, quick snap-in cut coming right back at us, cut 2. So that's a bit of a problem as well. Now again, as long as you can, if there's any way you can actually make your opponent stop through a feint, for example, then it's doable. But you've got to look at the possibilities of after blows and things like that. Just because you hit your opponent doesn't mean they're automatically going to drop dead. So you've got to be concerned about getting back out afterwards. So, the principal one is force your opponent into outside guard. So, for example, we could feint on the inside, feint on the outside, and then cut to the leg. That's one example. We can use back edges, for example. We can engage like this, turn back edge on, rotate and cut, which pulls her blade out of line. Those are a couple of good options for you. Just always bear in mind, if you cut your opponent's leg with a weapon like this, with nothing in the offhand, you're incredibly exposed. So you have to find a way to get them to stop and essentially be too wary of actually moving or cutting back at you. And that's usually done with pressure through feints. So double feints can be good as well. But as I said, that's my sort of favourites, if you like. There's quite a few mentions of different ways to cut the leg in Roath. And he does mention a few that actually are multiple feints to leg and head to build people into patterns as well. We'll go into that at a later date. This is just a sort of a brief overview. And in terms of using the point, I would say avoid using the point in terms of thrust work against the leg. There's too much chance of missing for a start, and the more curved blade you've got, the harder it is to actually hit your target because it kills off. So unless you've got a much longer sword, like a rapier, against a shorter blade, don't thrust towards the leg. So yeah, that's just a brief overview of how to actually attack the legs safely. Thanks.